They say the world ended once, not in fire, nor in war, but in silence. A silence broken only by the tolling of church bells, the cries of the dying, and the rustle of rats in the dark. In the year 1347, a ghost ship drifted into the Sicilian port of Messina. On board were corpses, mouths agape, eyes glassy, and something worse than death itself, a plague. Within months, it would spread like a black wind across Europe, devouring cities, kingdoms, and empires. It was not just a disease, it was a reckoning. And the world that emerged from its shadow would never be the same again. In the autumn of 1347, the wind over the Mediterranean carried more than salt and sea. It brought with it a silence that would swallow a continent. When the Genoese trading ship docked at Messina, Sicily, it was already too late. The crew, what remained of it, lay dying. Blackened swellings bulged from their armpits and groins, and their breath came in rattling gasps, as if death itself were clinging to their lungs. The authorities, horrified, ordered the ship back to sea. But disease does not wait for permission. Within days, the city began to change. Marketplaces emptied. Church bells tolled endlessly. The scent of incense fought in vain against the reek of decay. No one could explain what was happening. Some believed it was a curse from God. Others whispered of poisoned wells, of witches and foreign conspiracies. But none suspected the true carriers, the rats. And their silent passengers, fleas infected with Yersinia pestis. From Sicily, the plague rode north like a conqueror. It traveled in the wool of merchants, the breath of pilgrims, the cracked leather boots of fleeing refugees. It crossed borders, ignored barricades, and settled into the bones of towns and cities with indifferent hunger. In just 2 years, over half of Europe's population would be dead. But this is not just a tale of disease. It is the story of a world unmade. And in its unraveling, we find the first signs of something more terrifying than death itself: transformation. In Florence, they burned the bodies faster than they could dig graves. In Avignon, Pope Clement VI consecrated the entire Rhine River as holy ground, so the dead could be thrown into it without sin. In London, entire neighborhoods disappeared under the weight of silence, their doors marked with red crosses. "Lord have mercy," scrawled in trembling hands. And yet, amidst this collapse, there were those who saw opportunity. The nobles retreated to their manors. The rich locked themselves in walled gardens, eating delicacies while the streets groaned with corpses. But the poor, the desperate, had nothing to lose. Serfs abandoned their lords. Laborers demanded wages. Peasants, once bound by generations of silence, now held leverage. For the fields needed tilling, and the dead could not plow. What began as a plague soon became something more: a crack in the very order of the world. Still, the church preached repentance. Flagellants roamed the countryside, whipping their flesh raw in public penance. Believing suffering could halt the wrath of God, priests, overburdened and dying faster than they could bury, began to question their faith. Some drank, some fled. A few stood firm, tending to the sick until the plague took them too, their martyrdom unsung. And all the while, the rats ran. The world of 1347 was a tapestry of kingdoms, faiths, and feudal hierarchies. Delicate, ornate, and brittle. The Black Death did not simply tear the tapestry. It rewove it in blood and ash. Every death, every burning cart of corpses, every abandoned chapel became a thread in the new world to come. Because when enough people die, something else is born. By 1349, Europe was no longer a continent of laws. It was a continent of whispers and smoke. The courts had stopped functioning. Kings wrote decrees that no one read, for the scribes were dead, and the messengers buried in shallow graves. In Paris, once the intellectual heart of Christendom, the universities shut their doors. Professors fled, students scattered, and the libraries, those silent vaults of wisdom, gathered dust as their caretakers coughed and bled. With every chime of the death bell, the old world crumbled a little more. In the villages, chaos took hold. The manor house might still cast its long shadow over the fields, but its lords were gone, devoured by pestilence or madness. Some peasants took to the forests, turning bandit. Others took to prayer, building crude roadside shrines from bone and candle wax. But more dangerously, some took to rebellion. The Jacquerie in France, the Chompi in Florence, the peasants' revolt in England. These were not spontaneous outbursts. They were the screams of a world that had nothing left to fear. The old chains of feudalism had been rusted by blood. Now, with their masters dead or weakened, the lower orders dared to ask, "Why obey?" But not all rebellion came with swords and torches. There was a more quiet, insidious revolt against the soul. The Church, that eternal pillar of salvation, found itself hollowed from within. Its cathedrals still stood, casting long shadows on the town squares. But inside, the air was no longer filled with certainty. Too many prayers had gone unanswered. Too many holy men had died screaming. In some corners of Europe, priests charged coin for last rites, knowing they might be dead by dawn. In others, the dead were buried without sacrament, their mouths unblessed, their limbs wrapped in rags instead of robes. The sacraments became hollow rituals, performed out of fear more than faith, and from that void, new beliefs slithered forth. Heretics, mystics, visionaries, they emerged like weeds in a graveyard. Some claimed the plague was punishment for the corruption of the Church. Others believed the end of days had come. Cults sprang up in the countryside, dancing beneath the stars, bathing in rivers, speaking in tongues. The line between salvation and madness blurred like ink in water. In the cities, the paranoia festered. In Strasbourg, the Jews were blamed, accused of poisoning wells. 2,000 were burned alive in the public square, their screams swallowed by the roar of the crowd. Elsewhere, lepers were hunted, foreigners lynched. Anyone different became a scapegoat, as if their death could somehow buy back the favor of a silent God. But God did not answer. The cemeteries overflowed, mass graves split open in the heat of summer. The scent of rotting flesh became so familiar that mothers no longer covered their children's noses. And still, the plague carts came, wooden wheels creaking over cobblestones, piled high with bodies that had once been bakers, blacksmiths, lovers, thieves. And through it all, something deep within the human spirit began to shift. It was not just grief. It was not just fear. It was a recognition, a terrible understanding that no one was coming to save them. The nobility could not protect them. The clergy could not guide them. The kings, the saints, the scholars, all had fallen silent. And so, a new kind of person began to emerge, hardened, skeptical, independent, someone who looked not to the heavens for answers, but to the earth beneath their feet, to their own hands, their own mind, their own survival. The plague had killed half of Europe, but for those who lived, it had also killed something else: obedience. In the silence that followed the screams, something strange began to stir. Across Europe, the fields lay fallow. Once chattering marketplaces echoed with emptiness. But in the stillness, opportunity bloomed, strange, bitter, and electric. For the first time in centuries, the balance of power began to tilt. The laborers, once voiceless, faceless, chained to land and lords, now held value, precious value. With half the population buried, every hand that remained alive became a commodity. Wages rose, contracts were renegotiated. Serfs walked away from their ancestral chains, seeking better deals, freer land, a different kind of life. The noble families, hollowed by death, found themselves begging for workers. A single plowman could name his price. And so, the first cracks in feudalism began to spread. In Florence, widowed weavers took over looms and shops, refusing to hand them back. In England, landowners offered coin instead of crops, birthing the wage economy. In France, entire villages were purchased by commoners, survivors who now sat where nobles once ruled. Not all rejoiced. The elites, desperate to hold their grip, enacted laws. The Statute of Labourers in England, forbidding workers from demanding higher wages. But words written in parchment cannot bind a soul that has tasted freedom. The law was ignored, mocked, burned. And beneath this upheaval, another flame flickered. The human mind. The plague had taught mankind a terrible lesson. That death came not with prophecy, nor justice, nor pattern. It came blindly. It spared neither pope nor beggar. And in that terrifying equality, people began to question everything. Why did God allow such horror? Why had the church failed to foresee it? If relics and incense could not protect a priest, what were they truly worth? These were dangerous thoughts, but they did not die in silence. In the scriptoriums, still smelling of wax and damp parchment, monks began to copy more than holy texts. They wrote of herbal remedies, of lunar tides, of anatomy, of ancient Greek whispers long buried under Latin chants. In places like Padua and Paris, a quiet revolution brewed, one not of swords, but of ideas. The first flickers of the Renaissance had begun. Painters turned their eyes from saints in the sky to peasants in the field. Writers composed stories not just of martyrdom, but of love, betrayal, ambition, the raw meat of human nature. Sculptors carved not angels, but flawed men. Men who wept, men who lusted, men who lived. And all of it, rose from the shadow of death. The printing press, born not long after the plague years, would carry this new voice farther and faster than any preacher ever had. Knowledge, once hoarded in monasteries, became currency for the masses. Books left the abbey and entered the tavern, the market, the home. But knowledge, like fire, does not warm all equally. There were those who feared it, who longed for the silence of obedience, the comfort of chains. And so began the wars, of doctrine, of ideology, of rebellion. Martin Luther nailed his fury to a cathedral door. States fractured, faiths splintered. Yet beneath every revolution, every uprising, every reformation, lay the bones of the plague. It had unmade the world. But in doing so, it had given birth to something terrifyingly new. A world where man no longer knelt blindly before tradition. A world where the question why rang louder than because, and still the bells tolled. Centuries have passed since the Black Death swept across continents like a divine scythe. The bones have turned to dust, the cries long silenced, the plague pits covered by cobblestones and forgetfulness. But make no mistake, it never truly left us. The world rebuilt, yes. Cities rose again, flags changed hands, cathedrals once emptied were filled with new prayers. But beneath every brick, every crown, every printed page, the shadow of the plague lingered, like a scar that throbs when the storm approaches. It lives in how we treat disease, with fear, suspicion, division. It lives in our obsession with control, systems, borders, surveillance, all born from the panic of a time when control was lost. It lives in how we bury our dead, how we count our dead, how we remember, or choose not to. But perhaps its most chilling legacy lies not in death, but in how we responded to death. The Black Death did not just break bodies. It broke worldviews. It unraveled the divine order and asked a dangerous question. What if there is no meaning? Some fled into madness. Dance manias, self-flagellation, the hunting of scapegoats, Jews, lepers, beggars, thrown into flames to appease a wrathful God that may never have existed. Others turned to hedonism. Eat, drink, for tomorrow we die, they whispered in brothels and feasting halls. Paintings of skeletons dancing with kings appeared on church walls, a grotesque reminder that no one escapes. And yet, out of this nihilism, came came clarity. Mortal life was brief, yes, but it was real. It could be felt, touched, tasted. Art began to depict flesh, not as sinful, but as beautiful. Literature gave voice to peasants, to sinners, to doubters. Music mourned, yes, but it also celebrated. This is the paradox of the plague. It destroyed so much, yet birthed the very fire that would illuminate modernity. Without it, perhaps there is no Renaissance, no scientific method, no enlightenment, no questioning of kings or churches, no revolutions, no democracies, no you, watching this now through a screen built by minds that were once terrified of the dark. It taught us that nature does not care for hierarchies. That time moves forward, with or without us. That death is not the opposite of life, but its mirror. And though the Black Death may be buried in our past, its echo remains. In every mask worn during a new outbreak, in every fear-whispered rumor that blames the outsider, in every philosopher who asks not what is true, but why we believe it, in every soul who chooses to live boldly, knowing life is short. So when you walk the cobbled streets of an old European town and the wind shifts just so, listen, beneath the clang of church bells, beneath the hum of tourists and traffic. You might still hear them, the cough of a dying man in a darkened alley, the creak of a cart bearing too many bodies, the whispered prayers of a mother who has no more tears, and the voice, distant but eternal, of death itself. I came once, will come again. What will you do before I arrive?